The Chinese sent 3 Coast Guard ships into Taiwanese territorial waters where they stayed for about an hour this week, and was another example of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, ignoring Taiwan's sovereignty as it continues to turn up the hostility towards what it views as a breakaway province. The leadership in Beijing are not ambiguous about their intent towards Taiwan and publicly state that Taiwan will be reunited under the control of mainland China. China's decades-long military build-up at this point is focused on the recapturing of Taiwan and having a military peer capability with the United States to repel any response from it or its allies coming to the assistance of Taiwan. Many in the Western press, analysts and politicians assume an invasion of Taiwan is not a question of if but when, but despite intent, is this invasion option the best or first option for China? The elimination of Taiwan is a political dream of the CCP to finally eliminate the last vestiges of the Kuomintang that retreated to the island of Formosa after being defeated by the People's Liberation Army in 1949. Outside of the political satisfaction and the legacy it would give President Xi Jinping awarding him the accolades that eluded Mao Zedong, there are advantages that the taking of Taiwan would bestow China. The first is the technology that Taiwan creates 92% of the world's advanced computer chips and 18% of the semiconductors. China taking possession of this world asset or denying it to the rest of the world would elevate China's stature in the technology-hungry world. Militarily, the seizing of Taiwan would allow China to break into the first island chain, which is a chain of islands that extends from Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia to the Malay Peninsula. The breaking into the first island chain would mean that the People's Liberation Army Air Force, the PLADF, would be able to forward deploy in Taiwan and would be able to extend its primary air coverage across the entire South China Sea, allowing it to enforce its internationally illegal claims of the 9-dash line, the line used to outline China's territorial claims over the South China Sea, more effectively. This would allow the PLAF to operate over the Philippines if it chooses, and allow it to operate further out and cover the approaches of the Western Pacific, which is one of the directions of the US Navy to approach. This would also relieve the pressure on the People's Liberation Army Navy, the Plan, since it would not have to operate in the Western Pacific without air cover, since the Plan is still learning to handle aircraft carriers. With all the advantages to the CCP and the personal laureates that would be bestowed to the ambitious Xi Jinping, it would seem that the launching of the operation to take Taiwan would be an easy decision. The US during World War II developed a plan to invade Formosa, now Taiwan, called Operation Causeway. The plan was supported by Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Ernest King and had tepid support from Commander-in-Chief US Pacific Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz in that Formosa could be used to keep China in the war against Japan, but more importantly could be a large staging base to launch operations against the Japanese homeland. The operation was opposed by the Commander-in-Chief of the Southwest Pacific Area, General Douglas MacArthur, and Commander of the Fifth Fleet, Admiral Raymond Spruance, due to the operation was going to be resource-intensive by requiring a landing of an estimated 500,000 Marines and soldiers to take the island in what was expected to be a native population that would be hostile to the US, and the relative short window to operate around the island effectively. This would still be relevant to China, and the US in World War II was very experienced in conducting amphibious operations, where the CCP is not. Another reason that Operation Causeway is still relevant to the modern times is that it was about conducting an amphibious assault as part of the doctrine of forcible entry operations, which have not changed between 1944 and 2024. China's doctrine and apparent naval buildup, including troop landing ships and crafts, is about forcing entry into the island and supporting a campaign to physically land on the island that, from execution to logistics, is very much like what was envisioned by Causeway. China would also be encountering the same hostile defenses and population that the US was expecting, and would not only require the landing of a larger force to take the island, but a larger force to occupy it as well. Causeway was envisioning landing on the southern tip of Formosa and the islands in the Taiwan Straits, so it would mean that the US Navy foresaw operating in the same waters that China would need to operate to conduct its invasion. The US was expecting a 27-day operation, but in hindsight this was probably an optimistic estimate, since it took 36 days to take Iwo Jima and 80 days to take Okinawa, and Taiwan is a much bigger island than either of those examples. The reasons the days to take the island are important is because the US Navy estimated that operating in the Taiwan Straits was risky most of the year, with only March, April and September, October giving favorable weather conditions to operate an invasion and its logistic follow-on. China would have to contend with the same issue, as it is assumed it would have to conduct amphibious and logistic operations across the strait with a relatively small window. The PLA personnel and doctrine are not battle-tested and have not conducted a significant military operation since 1979 against Vietnam, and that did not go well for the PLA. The PLA and plan would have to conduct an operation in a relatively short window and against what is expected to be a determined resistance from the Taiwanese, and that does not include other combatants such as the US, Japan, the Philippines, and Australia. China would be somewhat supported in that its main bases on mainland China to support the invasion would have been shorter than in Causeway, but that may not be enough to compensate for an untested military conducting a complex amphibious operation against what would be strong resistance within and from around Taiwan. China can also be expected to not only have to fight in Taiwan, but it can expect attacks from the north, south, and west from the US and its allies. The Taiwanese also have the capability to use missiles to attack the Chinese mainland as well, and this could include an attack on the Three Gorges Dam that could impact 30% of the Chinese population, but a successful attack on the giant dam can be expected to cause a significant retaliatory response against civilian targets that could include a nuclear response. The risk of a loss, even without an attack on the Three Gorges Dam, by the Chinese could be destabilizing to its society and would weaken the hold of the Chinese Communist Party over society. It could be expected that Xi Jinping and his allies would lose face and would lose their hold on the CCP. Considering all the risk that a forcible entry amphibious operation entails, is this the best way for the CCP to attain its goals in Taiwan? There are better options available for reunifying with Taiwan that do not have the downside risk that threatens the CCP hold on power if it fails. The question is the threat of an invasion just that, and part of a grey zone tactics, or is it an option of last resort? If an invasion of the island is the preferred method, with all its risks, why would the CCP risk it? Is there some factor inside China that pushes the risky option as the first option? If there is such a factor, such as a maniacal leader who wants his legacy cemented while he is still alive, or an economic or demographic time bomb that could be so significant it also destabilizes society, it would be a worthwhile endeavor to find out that reason.